Okay, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm
Good
Dwight.
evening.
I am the Vice President of Race Relations and Diversity Alliance, formerly the Race Relations and Diversity Task Force. We have changed our name and we are looking forward to bringing programs that are really enlightful that can bring us all together. This whole piece here on the Civility Project fits right in with what we've been really aiming at. Right now we're working with on the bridge program with the church nearby us. And I think Bob is here from the group as well. And so we're really trying to see how we can get along better as people, different races, different religions, and so on. So this fits right in with our mission. And welcome you all. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for hosting this. We really appreciate it. We will get started in a moment. I do want to play a little quick intro video from our sponsor. We're really grateful to Delta Dental for sponsoring this and making it free to hosting organizations as well as to all of you. And then we will jump in and we'll get started. And what we'll do over the next hour is we'll talk a little bit about how we build Civility, how the Civility Project came to be. We invite your questions, your comments. You can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and then we can take them one at a time, whatever works best. But we do welcome the interactivity. We want to make this a really fun event. So without further ado, I'm going to start with this video and then we'll get started.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
Welcome, everybody. So Stephen and Nolan, I would love it if you would begin by introducing how the Civility Project came to be and what we're looking to do here.
Well, thanks, Lynn. Thanks to our host tonight. Thanks again to Delta Dental. Steve and I have been doing a lot of these things over the past year. We've become sort of very comfortable getting intimate with folks over Zoom, something we never thought possible when this project launched a year ago. We did a few sessions in person, and then suddenly, we were hit with COVID and we didn't know how we were going to get by. And Zoom has proven to be a very effective means of holding these sessions. We hope to get back in person soon. I think we all hope to be getting back in our in-person interactions very, very soon. But here we are. And as I said, we've been doing this formally now for as part of the Great Lakes Civility Project for about a year. And basically it started on bar stools. Steve and I had hosted for a couple, 3-4 years before the COVID monthly bourbon nights. Every month or two, we would bring our friends together, his friends and my friends, conservatives and liberals, and bring them together in a social setting, a local pub, restaurant, some other venue, and we would drink and talk with the hopes that people from different places in life, different viewpoints, people who never would consider perhaps interacting with each other, conversing with each other on a social basis, having earnest conversations with each other, would find a safe place to do that. And it worked. And a lot of people who didn't think they would ever be friends with someone who thought so differently than them ended up being friends. And so we did two of these, I think, Detroit Regional Chambers Mackinac Conference. And then thanks to Delta Dental, we were able to bring it to more groups. And, it sort of morphed into what we're doing tonight. And we are sure glad to be with you all.
Yeah. I think one of the best ways to kind of understand the Civility project, and where it comes from and what its purpose is as an effort by me and by Nolan to take what we've been able to learn over the last 12, 13 years that we've been working together, but also developed a pretty strong friendship, and share those lessons, share those understandings with other people who might seek to do the same thing. I mean, there is no question about the amount of distance between the two of us when it comes to politics and policy. I mean, we pretty much fundamentally disagree on those things, and so on each issue, I think we find ourselves on opposite sides of the issues. At the same time, we're able to maintain, that friendship that we have, and we are able to, professionally debate and even argue about those differences without it becoming, uncivil, without it becoming the kind of brutal exchanges that I think we are all used to seeing and witnessing and hearing in politics right now. And we over the years, I think we've seen the opportunities for that kind of exchange, that civil exchange, really dwindle. It's not just that that it was always hard. It's that it's harder now because things have deteriorated so badly, and because of a number of factors, not least of which is the last 4 years of really bitter division in the country. But accelerants like social media and 24-hour news cycle and have all led to a kind of insularity that makes it very difficult to do those things. And I think we've seen in the last year, especially, just how difficult it is to meet challenges together as a country when those things are true. I mean, something like COVID could have been an opportunity for people to reach out and work together. The push for civil rights that's represented at the heart of Black Lives Matter should not have been the kind of threat it was to too many white Americans. All of these things are signs that that we're in a really bad place. And the Civility Project is an effort for us to say, well, we've been able to weather all of these things without coming to blows. We've been able to weather all of these things without walking away and saying, well, I just don't talk to that person anymore. I will not argue with that person anymore because I can't stand it. And so, we try to share with groups like yours the ways that we've made that possible.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate that intro. And I just want to, everybody who's joined in the past couple of minutes, just welcome you and also invite you to add your questions or comments in the chat so we can address them as we go through the program. So Stephen and Nolan, I wonder if we could start with some of your practical steps about how we can go about building civility, and then we can introduce some of these complicating factors and talk about how we address that. So where do people begin? How do they start by building civility?
I think you have to want to do this. I mean, you have to see the value of it. And, I said it last night's session, yesterday's session, last week when everybody was posting quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. The one that hit me that I hadn't seen before, and I'll paraphrase, was the quote that said, we fear each other because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we don't communicate with each other. And I think that's the basic goal of this project. And also, the first step towards, being able to have civil conversations with people you disagree with, and friendships with people you disagree with, is wanting to get there and willing to do the hard work that's necessary. And it starts with developing some understanding of other people, getting past that we don't know each other stage. And that's why, when we hold in-person sessions, we generally ask our audience to pair off with people who they normally wouldn't talk to, and start having a conversation based around asking questions about who they are and what their experiences in life have been, and how those experiences impact their viewpoints. Because, we may not want to believe this, but the people you disagree with generally come to their opinions the same way you do. Good people, most good people, come to their opinions the same way. They take the facts, they take the information, they apply their own values and life experiences, and they come up with opinion. And if they don't, if their opinion doesn't agree with yours, doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them sinister. It doesn't mean they want to destroy the country. They want to hurt other people. It's just they've lived a different life than you have. And the start of this is figuring out for you to try to understand what that life they lived was, and how it impacted them, and how it affected who they are. And Steve and I did this early on in a StoryCorps session for PBS, one of Steve's many employers now.
All right. StoryCorps, for those who are not familiar, is a NPR program that has them sort of traveling from city to city, collecting American stories about American relationships. They ask people to come down and spend an hour with someone that they have a relationship with, and they talk about how that relationship came about, how it sustains itself, what were sort of important inflection points in that relationship. And when they came to Detroit, I thought to myself, well, the person I want to do that with is Nolan. And the reason I want to do it is because, we talk a lot about the issues that we're, paid to cover and think about and argue about. And we've developed this relationship where we're able to have that argument without, real incivility. But I said, I didn't think either of us really knew that much about where the point of view of the other came from. Like, what was it that made Nolan Finley into, a conservative? And what was it that made me into a liberal or a progressive? I wanted us to go and tell each other those stories, that origin story, who we really were, and how we came to these places. And so we did that for an hour. And, two things happened. One was that we both learned a lot about the other that we didn't know before. But I think we also came to understand a lot more about the nature of the disagreements that we have. That there is a big history for each of us behind why we believe the things that we do and why we argue the way we do. What positions we take, and that has I think given both of us a deeper appreciation of the other's arguments. It's harder, I think, to dismiss or assign bad motives to arguments that are being made by somebody whose origin story you have a much clearer understanding of where it comes from. And that was really a turning point, not just in our working relationship, but in the development of the Civility project. I mean, I think both of us saw that the way that changed our interactions was important, and an opportunity for other people to be able to do the same thing, to learn more about the person that you're talking to or arguing with, or who you think is just wrong all the time, so that you may still think that person is wrong all the time, but you understand why they're wrong. You understand how they're coming up with these crazy opinions.
You know, I put a link, by the way, in the chat to anybody who'd like to find the StoryCorps interview. It's on our website, and you can definitely find it there. But this brings up a question that I don't think we've ever asked in these civility sessions. And thank you, Paula, for offering it. So Paula asks, is it more possible for the two of you because you operate professionally in a world of ideas through journalism? And I want to piggyback on that question, asking you what made you want to dig deeper and have that conversation in the first place? Because of course, you guys were brought together as, you know, editorial page editors at the Free Press and News, but you had to decide to get personal and build a friendship. So Paula's question about, is this easier for you because you operate in that world of ideas, and what made you want to take that next step?
I mean, that is an excellent question. I don't know if it's easier. I worked with someone before Steve in this same capacity where we were supposed to be yin and yang, you know, point, counterpoint, and found it almost impossible to work with that person because of this inability to have any sort of civil discourse. There was always the gotcha element, always trying to score points during our conversations. And the thing that impressed me first about Steve was, you know, he wasn't trying, you know, his goal in our conversations on air, in public, before groups, wasn't to destroy me or me to destroy him. You know, we were having, and of course it was profitable for both of us to maintain a civil relationship. But beyond that, I mean, I felt like the thing I respected about him first is that I felt like he was actually listening, you know, and sometimes you wouldn't know it by looking at us because we can get up there after it. But I always felt that there were lines he respected, and certainly I respected, that we didn't cross, that we didn't, that might have broken the relationship. And so beyond that, I mean, both of us are more than our politics. And you know, you might look at us and say, well, they couldn't have anything in common, but we did have a lot in common, a lot to talk about beyond politics. And, you know, so you know, that made it easier. But I don't know that our profession made it easier, because there's a lot of people in our profession. Well, for one thing, most of the people in our profession are like-minded, but there are a lot of people in our profession who are unable to civilly converse.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, if you go back 10, 20 years, there were lots more pairings of people across, you know, ideological lines that were about intellect and were about ideas. And even if they argued and fought, you got that they were fighting about the ideas. They weren't fighting each other. You know, one of my favorite television shows when I was in college was the McLaughlin group. And, you know, they used to get after each other on that show. But it wasn't as though they were fighting each other. They weren't disrespecting each other. They were fighting about the ideas that they had. I can't think of an analog today to that. I can't think of, you know, the things that we see, especially, you know, on cable, which is now the majority of the television market, television news market. You know, these roundtables they put together on cable news shows, first of all, are all pretty imbalanced. You know, they're one side or the other. But when they do bring people together, it's just a shouting match. And there's a lot of money in that. You know, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in our business right now to make a living off of that, to you know, to be shouting and insulting people and coming up with really clever one-liners that you know, cut people down to size. You know, I think one of the things that has defined especially the professional interaction between me and Nolan is that we just never saw much point in that. But it's harder. I think that takes more effort. I think it's a lot easier to come up with something snappy or clever to say and leave it at that. It's a lot harder to listen to someone else's ideas and then try to respond in a way that matches, the intellect of what they said, even though you're coming at it from another way. So I don't think it's easier at all.
Yeah. So then the next question for everyday folks like the rest of us is, how do you guys were brought together because of your professions, but how would we begin in our daily lives to bridge that divide, to start to get to know people who might hold different opinions? Where do we take that on an everyday person level?
And that's the point of this project. And when we were doing our live exercises, we invited people. We come across people every day who you don't agree with, who share, who don't share your views, or who are polar opposites. Many of the times they're sitting across the family table with you. And I think we've all experienced that over the past year or so, in particular, where family relationships have been broken because of political disagreements. And so we encourage people to start, as I said at the beginning, by asking those basic questions about each other, and then entering a conversation with honest goals. A conversation is not a competition. You're not Jehovah's Witnesses out there. You're not out there to convert. A conversation should be viewed as a beneficial exchange of ideas. You've got to be able to see the value in speaking to someone with different viewpoints. And for me, and I think for Steve, for us, the value is, it's good to understand what the people whose ideas you oppose are thinking. It's useful to check your own viewpoints and positions and not get too smug, not get too self-righteous against somebody else's views, because it may shock you, but may not be 100% right. I've been doing this job for 20 years, almost 21 at the news, and I started on day one with this knowledge that I may not be right on every issue, and so I have to work harder to test my own viewpoints and to be willing to adapt and adjust them when I find out, well, heck, I was wrong about that. And so, you've got to start with honest goals. You want to get something out of the conversation other than to express your own self-righteousness, if you will, to have a platform for your own sermon. Have an honest exchange. Don't condescend. Ask questions and try to get an understanding when somebody says something that you just don't agree with. Try to come up to a point of understanding about why that thing was said and what you might learn from that, and then listen.
Yeah,
and make sure you're listening.
Yeah, we talk a lot about listening and how important it is, but also how important it is to get right. Listening, when we talk about it in the context of the Civility Project, is just a little bit different than the way I think most of us think of when we think about whether we're listening or not. I think for many of us, the idea is if we're not talking, we must be listening. If somebody else is talking and we're not, then we're listening to them. But I think I catch myself pretty frequently when someone else is talking, being wrapped up still in my own thoughts, in my own head, thinking about what I'm going to say back to them when they stop talking, or thinking about how much I want to judge what they're saying, as opposed to just really trying to understand what they're saying and why they say it. The term I think that a lot of people use is active listening, where you really are invested in what the other person is saying, and invested in the idea of of trying to understand it. On the radio show that I host every morning, interaction, of course, is the heart of that show. It's an interview show. We have guests on, but it's also participatory for the listeners. There's a lot of calls into the program, and my test, my job there is to listen, right? Is to really listen to everybody. And my test for myself about whether I listen is two things. One is whether after somebody's talking, I could actually repeat back to them what they said, and not just a quick or dismissive summary of it, but really be able to re-explain their point from their point of view without injecting my own bias or disdain for their position. And then the second test, of course, is whether I can ask questions that further the conversation. Whether I've heard enough and understood enough of what that person said to be able to come back to what they're saying and not just go on to the next thing that I want to talk about. How curious am I about what they just said, and trying to really understand or know more about where it comes from. I think those are pretty handy tools for checking yourself about whether you're actually listening to somebody or whether you're just waiting to jump back in it with your own thoughts.
So
Yeah, I want to apologize for that Jehovah Witness remark. That was flippant. I didn't mean to offend. I'm a religious person and don't want to belittle anybody else's religion. So I apologize for that. I would say one thing added to what Steve said is that, he mentioned earlier, we disagree on most issues. Those disagreements most often are about process, not outcome. He wants to live in a world where people can rise to their own, to the level of their ability and not be held back by any other factors. I want that world too. I think as a conservative, maintaining a permanent underclass in this country is disastrous economic policy. And it drags down the prosperity for the whole. I'm sure Steve feels the same way. Now, we have vastly different ideas for how to erase those conditions that create the permanent underclass. But getting to that point is the same, and that's true on most other issues. I mean, he wants our city, to be vibrant and a great place to live. I want that too. We have different ideas for what will get us to that point. So once you understand, for most people, most good people share the desire for the same outcome. We want the world to be better, and we want a place where everybody can, live this one life you have happily and prosperously. I mean, that reality weighs on me all the time when I'm considering an issue of other people's rights, is that, man, you only get one shot at this. I only get to live one life. You only get to live one. It's true of everybody. Everybody should be able to live that life as happily as possible. Nobody should be miserable and oppressed in this one life that they've been given. And we know that throughout history, the majority of people who have lived unhappy, oppressed lives. They've lived in poverty. They've lived in suffering and misery. We've got an opportunity in this world, at this point in history, to bring the number of people who live that way to a minimum. And we should all be working toward that goal. And, I think once you understand the sort of common desires, the arguing about the process becomes more meaningful, more productive.
So we have a ton of great questions. I want to make sure we get to all of them. The first one from Carla is civility is important, but it doesn't automatically bring justice or liberation. How does civil discourse move people to recognize and protect the full humanity of those whose ideologies they disagree with?
Well, I mean, one of the ways is by engendering and protecting the respect for other people's points of view, and the respect for them as people who have every right to their point of view and have every right to the things that they want for themselves and their lives. I think this is a really interesting question to ask right now when we're immersed in a really difficult conversation about inequality and the vast unfulfilled promises of this country. I mean, there are a lot of markers you can point to that suggest we've come further than we ever have before in terms of erasing inequality in this country. I think there are also many markers that suggest that we have a lot more to do, and the last year has been a master course in what those inequalities look like and what effect they have on people's lives. I mean, right here in Detroit, of course, we saw how imbalanced something like a pandemic could be, given the vast, deep intergenerational poverty and isolation that Detroiters and Black Detroiters in particular suffer from. That's the reason the pandemic has been so hard on us in the city, and that is about inequality. I always say that at the very root of the question about why civil discourse is part of the way to solve that is, I always say, if not that, then what's the alternative, right? What would you do other than try to convince your fellow Americans that you deserve these things and that you want these things and that you're demanding these things? 2 weeks ago, we saw what the alternative looks like. We saw what happens when people say, well, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. I'm not going to reason or debate or argue. I'm going to go to the Capitol and I'm going to, bust the windows and climb in and, rummage through people's desks and try to disrupt the whole process. The weird thing to me about that approach always is, okay, and then what, right? If you're not willing to eliminate the other side, if you're not willing to say, well, we'll just get rid of all these people who disagree, that way doesn't work. The violent, grabbing of authority and power necessitates some plan to, neutralize the other side. We've tried that once in this country. It didn't work out wonderfully then. We are more than 170 years from that point now, and I just don't think it makes any sense. You have to use dialogue to get to these places, and the dialogue that we're talking about, I think, which endows everybody with the same respect and the same validity for what they think and what they believe, I think is the path to fixing all of those really awful inequalities and the feelings that people have as a result of them.
I'll go back to that King quote. We got to get beyond the fear. And the only way to do that is to talk to each other and to learn to communicate with each other. And it's very, very hard. Right now, I think we have a lot of folks in this country looking at other folks on the opposite side of this divide and seeing people who in their minds are less than human. And that's a dangerous place for us to get to. Demonization leads to a lot of bad things. And it's harder to do that if you commit to understanding the other person and communicating with the other person. It's hard to get to that place of dehumanization. And that's the danger I think we face in the country.
So we have like so many great questions. I'm hoping we can get to them all tonight, and I'm doing my best, everybody. So I hope that I'll get yours in. So Tia Marie asked a really interesting question. She said, please speak about this civility when one side will not or does not acknowledge your position or experience. Think racial justice, Black people know what it is, and some others don't believe or understand the impact. How would you push past the pain of racism and have an honest discussion?
Well, I mean, that's the point of these conversations. That's the point of building a trustful, respectful foundation so that you can ask questions of other folks, and they can ask questions for you and from you. And I think in that personal interaction is where you get to the understanding. Otherwise, you're just left to your own assumptions forever. We make a lot of assumptions about people whom we don't understand and don't know. And so I think you just have to keep drilling away at this.
I get this question a lot when people ask me, well, how do you deal with someone like Nolan, right? Who's a conservative? Like, how can you do that? How can you argue with him? How can you still be talking to him? And I always say that, the civility that we're talking about is not about being nice. It's not about, trying to spare somebody's feelings or for everyone to always feel good about everything. I mean, I say things to Nolan that I suspect sometimes catch him by surprise or make him angry. I talk very bluntly about race and the role that it continues to play, not just in society generally, but that plays in the life that I live and the things that happen to me or don't happen. And the reason I'm able to do that, though, the reason that I don't have any fear about doing that is because we know each other, and he knows where I'm coming from, and I know where he's coming from, and he knows that I'm not saying something to insult him, even if what I'm saying might be offensive or insulting. He knows that I'm asserting what I believe, and I'm pushing for what I think needs to happen, and it's not an attack on him. I think you can't have that conversation in a relationship where one side feels like the other might be attacking them, right? Or offending them or insulting them. And that's another reason that these kinds of interactions are so critical. You just can't do it. You can't have the kind of arguments that we have if both people are not really in the same place in terms of respecting the other.
So many people have sessions, and we have this question in our chat too about, how can we listen when, with an open mind when maybe the other side isn't, or how do we bring people to that, to have an open mind, especially when there's binary thinking. One of the questions that I got tonight was the whole 1776 versus 1619 is very binary thinking, and the premise could dissolve an attempt at civility if somebody's really tied to one side or another. How do we reconcile that? How do we expand that open-mindedness if maybe it's not on all sides?
Well, again, I would say don't come into any conversation, filled with self-righteousness. Come with this honest goal of exchanging ideas. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to agreement, but I'd be interested in having that discussion with someone, perhaps I didn't agree with. It's stimulating to share these kind of ideas. And when we get to this feeling that the only benefit in a conversation, the only time a conversation is beneficial if it concludes with both people in absolute agreement, I think we might as well give up. I mean, there's some benefit, a great deal of benefit in exchanging ideas and keeping the conversation going and moving. And you may gradually come to some sort of middle point, but you may not. But if you've learned to converse in a civil manner, when you get to that point where it's absolutely necessary for us to come to a middle ground, we're better prepared to do it.
Some people have been asking about techniques for teaching. So how do we teach in groups and communities, in workplaces, that these techniques are being expressed and other people can learn them, even with children or in schools? Are there thoughts about how people who are here tonight can take these concepts and then share them in their spaces?
I think taking the model that we would normally be using, if we were all together in physical space, to other places makes a lot of sense. Getting people not just together in a group, but getting them together in small groupings to be able to have that conversation about, well, here's why I think the things that I do, and here are the things that happened in my life and in my experiences that led me to be this person who believes these things, and to do that in exchange with other people who have different experiences and have had come to different understandings about things. It works really well, I think, in the worlds that we all live in. Think about your neighborhood, for instance, and the opportunity to do that, or think about your school, or your church, or your workplace. I think starting there, first of all, diffuses some of the instinctive bitterness when you start off talking about things that divide you, right? Things that people don't agree with. Instead, talking about who you are and what you believe. But it also helps with that relationship building, that idea that these are not effective as episodic arguments or discussions. Part of the problem, in fact, with incivility is that I think people raise the stakes of each interaction with someone they disagree with as, I gotta win this because I'm not gonna come back to it, right? I'm not gonna come back to this conversation. They see it as a zero-sum exercise, win or lose. If you switch that to thinking about an extended over period of time conversation, again, that diffuses that conflict that's there, and gets you away from that to the place where you can build the things that make the conflict possible without being destructive.
It's easy to live in an echo chamber today. Our society is set up today, makes it very easy to never interact with other people who don't share your views. We shape our social circles that way. As Steve mentioned earlier, our mass communication outlets provide the perfect format for that, because you can choose, oh gosh, I'm going to watch MSNBC or I'm going to watch Fox or what, and you stick only hearing people affirming your own viewpoint. And there's a danger in that, because you may miss the flaws in your own argument if you're only associating, you're only around talking with people slapping you on your back and telling you always how right you are. So there's benefit in reaching across, and it's easier today not to do that, which is why you have to work harder and why you have to, guide your children in that direction, encourage your social circles to go in that direction, to have honest exchanges with people from all viewpoints. So you don't get lazy and you don't get self-righteous, you don't get complacent.
That brings up a really good point, Nolan, about the role of social media in building incivility, but also how do we, when we have so many different sources to choose from, agree on a set of facts? And we've seen sort of the distortion of the notion of truth over the past number of years. How do we, in order to come to these conversations, have an agreed upon trusted resource that we know is factual as a starting point or foundation for these conversations? And then how does social media play into that?
Well, I mean, that's hard today because the hierarchy of credibility in our news offerings, our news outlets, has been, just blown to hell. Not too many years ago, to be in the business Steve and I are in, to be in the journalism business, whether it was electronic or print, required a major investment. You had to have a printing press. You had to have a broadcast license. You had to have satellites. You had, limited choices, and those choices had to serve as broad a market as possible. Now it's all diffused, and you might Google something, Google Detroit, and you see an article from Steve Henderson, and right below it is another piece from Bob the blogger in his mom's basement, and they're resting there side by side. And so you have to work a whole lot harder to vet your sources of information, and you still might not get it right. You still might not get the complete picture. Social media has been a wonderful thing, and it's been a very sinister thing as well. It has, I won't say anonymity because that's not quite right. Your name is out there, but the distance factor of it has enabled some of the grossest behavior, the most offensive behavior, and have shown people at their worst. And as Steve says often, there's reward in incivility on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is the first mass communication technology that we control ourselves, that we have 100% control of on our own as consumers and as publishers, and that's a really wonderful development for its potential. The problem is that it's really young, and I think what we're learning is that its easiest use is for self-indulgence and non-productive communication. I mean, it's very quick to resort to uncivil exchange because of its anonymity, because of its instant nature, and so we're kind of stuck with this thing right now that has itself consumed the power and the voice of other media. I mean, social media, includes more people now than any other medium, right? There's far more people on Facebook right now than there are watching the evening news, which is running on all three networks still right now. Part of what we talk about with the Civility Project is not resisting the idea of social media, but resisting the norms of social media and stepping away from them to be able to, communicate with people in a really different way. And, the idea of shutting somebody down or shutting somebody out, which are things that get you big cheers on social media and get you more followers and get you more attention, are antithetical to the idea of the kind of dialogue that we're talking about. And I think you have to actively say to yourself, I am not in that space. I am not going to lean into that space. I'm going to do it in a really different way. And that's hard because, again, everybody is there. I mean, everyone is on social media, doing the things that social media encourages us to do.
And I have taken lately to limiting my participation on social media, my exchanges. If I'm going to argue with someone, I'm going to do it person to person, as face to face or voice to voice, because not doing it any other way leads to a lot of misunderstanding, uh, leads to a lot of missed opportunities to get the conversation right. I think it's the absolute worst way to communicate on a serious matter, or on a matter that, in which you are trying to come to some kind of consensus. So I pretty much have limited my exchanges to, very innocuous posts.
So I think a really great question to close with from Denise was, are there ground rules to beginning a civil conversation with another person or among a group? So from this event tonight, what can people take with them to get started in their circles or even bring these concepts to their groups?
Yeah, I mean, as we said, before, what we talked about was technique. We didn't talk much about the ground rules, but if somebody's willing to sit with you in good faith, to have a honest conversation with honest goals set, you know, cut them a break. Don't jump down their throats if they get something wrong. If they're there to learn, you have to assume. And, you don't want to punish people for engaging and for engaging in a good spirit. So, raise your or lower your sensitivity level and listen, explain when you need to. But I would say that's one rule. And the other is, don't preach. Listen, don't preach.
And I say, start small. Start with one person. Start with one person who you think, hey, there's an opportunity for me to relate differently to this person than I do, to know more about why they think the things they do, to know more about where it all comes from, and interact with that person. And don't think about it as, again, episodic, that I'm going to do it once and it's all going to be fixed, or then I can move on to someone else. I mean, do it as an investment and as a way of saying, I'm going to get to know this person. I'm going to understand this person better. And ultimately that will lead to a better way to be able to talk to this person. I have an uncle who is the most rabidly conservative person you could imagine. I mean, just so far right, and so far in favor of Donald Trump, and even somewhat in favor of the insurrectionists the last couple of years. I mean, really just the opposite of me. And he's been like that my whole life, since I was a kid. So, it's taken a long time for me to get to the point where we can actually have a conversation, and no, we never come to agreement. We are never going to come to agreement, but he's a member of my family, and you can't get rid of him. You've gotta deal with this person. And so it makes sense, to make that investment. And I think you have to kind of apply that same approach to other people, to saying, in the long term, I hope to be able to talk to this person about these things instead of yelling at them.
And pick the right spots. I mean, there's some places where, that lend themselves to these conversations, and some places that don't. So, pick the right setting, the right time, make sure everybody is in a comfortable place before you start.
I think that's great. There's so many wonderful resources that different participants provided in the chat. So take a look there if you're looking for some really wonderful direction. And we're so grateful that you guys were all here tonight. We do send out a monthly e-blast of additional resources and opportunities. And as I was talking with Karen about before we started, we are booking sessions through the first half of this year already. So if it's something you'd like to bring to your group or your community, just give me a shout. My email is in the chat. It's on the website too, which is GreatLakesCivilityProject.com. And we're just so grateful to Race Relations and Diversity Alliance for supporting this and hosting this tonight, and to Delta Dental for making this possible. So thank you, Nolan and Stephen, and thank you to everybody who came. It was really wonderful to see all of you
Yeah,
here.
thanks for devoting your time to this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was really great.
Oh, and Mary's asking also how you get on the list. Okay, Mary, I'll put you on the list. Got it.